Okay, it's time for a new update, a new seasonal update, which will cover the past 3 months, so pretty much the spring, and everything that's been happening within the 5 usual blocks. So the first one is ePrivacy and regulatory updates. The second, MarTech and AdTech. The third, AI competition and digital markets. The fourth, pets or privacy enhancing technologies and zero-party data or empowerment tech and so on. And the fourth, the future of media. I did say I would try my best to have a human being by my side the next time I did a newsroom, which is now. But once again, it was not possible to align the stars. So we are stuck here with Alice, which is a voice, no disrespect meant, but it's an AI voice provided by 11 Labs. And this will be my companion to give the whole thing a little color or to make it more digestible. Before we start, I'll give a shout out as well to Robert Bateman and Federico Marengo, who regularly break down some of the news falling in our radar. And that makes my life easier. So thanks for all the work you do. I'm adding a link to Robert's feed. So his podcast and channel is called The Privacy Corner, and to Federico's newsletter on AI and privacy. And you'll find those in the episode's blog post. Now, let's go for it. And we're starting with ePrivacy and regulatory updates. And here we start with enforcement, and then we'll move on to legal updates and guidelines.
On March 18th, New York's Attorney General announced a $650,000 settlement with Saturn, a social networking app for high school students. The developer had failed to screen new users by birth date so as to ensure they were indeed high school students.
Well, on top of that, the app, so Saturn, was copying the address book from its users and processing that data even after app permissions had been revoked. It also paid some students to promote the app, and this wasn't disclosed. And also, it had some important security flaws, exposing some data about verified users to those that were not verified. So, that's it. More.
On March 19th, the Hanover Administrative Court in Germany sided with the Lower Saxony Supervisory Authority when requiring a valid consent choice from a local publisher. Quite critically, the Data Protection Authority had considered that loading the Google Tag Manager script as a container for different pixels or server calls, including those corresponding to consent management platforms, was not exempted from prior consent.
This will be very interesting to a lot of people in AdTech and MarTech, as it runs counter to the popular interpretation, or maybe the most logical one, that a tag container, right, falls within the technical necessity exemption in the ePrivacy Directive in 5.3. But the agency, so the Data Protection Agency, explained that there is no technical necessity if it serves no purpose whatsoever from the point of view of the data subject. They were saying that it only served the data controller. So it is quite controversial. Anyway, more.
On March 27th, the UK Information Commissioner's Office, ICO, issued a £3 million fine to Advanced Computer Software Group, a company which acts as a data processor for the National Health Service, NHS, and others.
Yes, so this follows the ransomware attack from 2022 that exposed the personal data of nearly 80,000 people, including sensitive information about some individuals receiving care at home, and that, again, had attacked that company, Advanced Computer Software Group. The company had failed to implement basic security measures, such as two-factor authentication. And it's not surprising there's such a focus on security after the growing scale and number of ransomware attacks, and with the 2024, so last year's Synovis data breach still very present in memory in the UK, as it interrupted many urgent hospital procedures in London, in the London area, and could have just cost lives. More.
On April 14th, Meta published its decision to start training its AI platform on Instagram and Facebook user content, relying on legitimate interest as a legal basis, rather than specific prior consent.
Yes, with plenty of reactions following then throughout May, with NOYB, so Max Schrems, sending the company a cease and desist letter threatening with class action lawsuits across Europe, the German consumer rights body filing a lawsuit, and Hamburg's DPA, Supervisory Authority, announcing an urgency procedure to demand that the Irish TPC holds Meta's AI training activities. In the end, Meta was arguing it was relying on the door left open by the recent EDPB opinion. Now, on April 21st, the European Commission issued two important fines under the Digital Markets Act, the DMA, which is this sort of new legal weapon against the market power of some internet gatekeepers. Meta received the lesser one, amounting to 200 million euros, for its use of a consent or pay model in order to comply with the user consent requirements imposed by the DMA whenever one such gatekeeper intends to combine user data across multiple services, in this case, Instagram, WhatsApp, Facebook, and Threads. Apple received the larger fine, but we will discuss that in the competition section because there is no overlap with personal data protection in that fine that I can see. More.
On May 1st, the California Privacy Protection Agency ordered Todd Snyder to overhaul their privacy practices and properly train internal teams, imposing a fine of nearly $350,000 on the clothing retailer.
In essence, they failed to honor opt-out requests. Apparently, when clicking on the preference center for, 40 days, the links weren't working. Also, global privacy control was disabled. If you wanted to opt out, you were required to verify your identity before submitting a request. So it was just considered that they will need to train their personnel much better and then make sure that the opt-out system works. More.
On May 2nd, Ireland's Data Protection Commissioner issued a €530 million fine to TikTok, following the transfer of EEA personal data to China without adequate measures or sufficient transparency. It was also asked to stop data transfers immediately. However, TikTok appealed on May 27th and on June 5th. The High Court granted a stay until October to avoid serious disruption to the business, which in the end does seem to require that certain things happen in China.
Okay, more.
On May 9th, Google agreed to a $1.375 billion settlement with Texas's Attorney General over various claims concerning the privacy of state residents.
Yes, so there were three claims here. One of them is the company's collection of location data, even when users thought that the location feature had been disabled. The second one is the ongoing data collection during Chrome's incognito mode, and there's been plenty of things going on around the incognito mode being misleading, right? And the third is the unlawful collection of biometric data, including face features and voice prints through Google Photos and the Google Assistant without adequate consent. Now, over to Spain.
On May 14th, Spain's supervisory authority, the AEPD, issued a €3.2 million fine to Carrefour, a giant European retailer, for its handling of 5 data breaches dating back to 2023. Loyalty card details of nearly 120,000 customers were exposed, including information such as purchasing frequency, dates of birth for all family members, geolocation data, purchasing habits, identity card numbers, and physical addresses.
Yeah, it seems like even in the few cases where people were notified, they would get a brief message simply stating that the user's password had to be changed as a means to enhance the system's security, but that was it. More.
On May 19th, the Italian supervisory authority Garante fined the developer of Replica AI with €5 million for lacking a valid legal basis for the processing of personal data, as well as for failing to verify the age of its users.
Well, Replica AI allows its users to create virtual friends with whom to have a conversation as a means to, so they claim, improve their emotional well-being. The agency, so the Garante, opened a separate investigation of the training data used by the company to build its underlying AI model. More.
On May 21st, the French supervisory authority, CNIL, issued a €900,000 fine to a marketing services company that was transferring and using mailing lists for commercial prospecting without the consent of individuals included in such lists.
Yes, so in other words, a data broker. Now, on June 3rd, and this we'll have here in the enforcement section, even though for now it's just researchers unveiling what's happened, but a group of researchers in the Netherlands, Spain, and Belgium discovered that both Meta and Yandex, so the Russian internet group, had been connecting mobile browsing data to specific identities through an Android loophole. And this allowed pixels on mobile websites to send calls to their own pre-installed native apps, like Instagram. And then they would be able to connect identifiers that a native app has access to with the browsing habits and signals obtained through pixels, again on those websites. Apparently, they have stopped doing this, or Meta have just stopped doing this after the findings. And now we're going to move on to the next subsection, which is legal updates and guidelines.
Mexico's new data protection law for the protection of personal data held by private parties came into effect on March 21st.
Apparently, it expands the definitions of personal data and data controllers, which will result in reclassifying many data processors as controllers in Mexico now. And it also enhances data subject rights and introduces new protections against automated decision-making.
On April 11th, the US Department of Justice, DOJ, released guidelines, FAQs, and a policy to help companies comply with the executive order, preventing the transfer of sensitive data about US citizens to certain countries.
Yes, we had touched on this during our interview with Mike Hintz and a few weeks ago, and the DOJ also made clear that enforcement will be stepped up in July. More.
On April 14th, NIST updated its privacy framework, aligning it with its recent cybersecurity guidelines.
Yes, we touched on that framework during a recent interview in the Spanish channel, because in the end, the NIST framework is used all over the world. Okay, more.
On April 22nd, the FTC updated COPPA rules, which will enter into force on June 21st. Provisions are now aligned with more current forms of verification for the obtention of parental consent.
Yes, and consent will now be required for targeted advertising to minors. Also, this update included an expansion of the concept of personal information to include biometric data, which is used for identification purposes. So, just like the GDPR. More.
On May 19th, the Take It Down Act was signed into law, banning the non-consensual online publication of sexually explicit images and videos that are both authentic and computer-generated. The law includes notice and takedown obligations for covered online platforms.
Then, on May 21st, the European Commission advanced one of their expected measures to simplify the GDPR, and they started by exempting companies with less than 750 employees from complying with Article 30, with records of processing activities, or ROPA, if certain conditions apply, right? Like, for example, an annual turnover that falls below 150 million euros, if I've got that right. More.
On June 2nd, the California Assembly approved the Opt Me Out Act, AB 566, If approved in the state Senate, the new law would require internet browsers to include a built-in universal opt-out signal, such as the global privacy control.
Yes, at this point it would mean that Google's Chrome, Microsoft Edge, and Apple's Safari, because none of them supports it, will have to do what Firefox or Brave have already been doing for quite some time.
On June 3rd, California's legislature approved Senate Bill 690 to address the misuse of the California Invasion of Privacy Act by predatory litigators. The decades-old anti-wiretapping law has made it very expensive for some website owners to deploy pixels or cookies on users' browsers without prior consent. It will now be aligned with the CCPA, preventing further lawsuits after January 2026, but not applying retroactively.
That's it. We have covered these SIPA lawsuits in a few interviews, including the one with Daniel Rosenzweig in February. Now we're going to move on to MarTech and AdTech, and here I'll start with Google keeping third-party cookies after all, publishing its decision on April 22nd. The company was subject to, as we all know, immense pressure from the courts and competition authorities. There was a proposal to force them to sell Chrome, to entirely get rid of it. So in that context, they decided to just forget about the whole thing with a forced move to the privacy sandbox. Then on May 3rd, and starting with a good interview with Ben Thompson, Mark Zuckerberg and Meta announced full cycle automation for ads on Instagram and Facebook, as well as the future of WhatsApp as a customer service and ads platform. And I think that's very, very interesting, very relevant. No matter how much you hate Facebook and the impact they have on society, these things will affect everyone around us. From some ad agencies becoming expendable, to Instagram replacing some creators with AI videos, to WhatsApp becoming a huge B2C channel, to basically entire small retail and e-commerce verticals depending on Meta. So let's break it down.
Advertisers will now be able to rely on Advantage Plus end-to-end campaigns to let Meta's AI tools decide on everything, from selecting an audience to putting together a relevant creative, to picking an adequate placement, to defining a budget. The only thing that advertisers will have to do is determine a goal and pricing that goal.
Okay, that's for automated ads. So who needs an agency or a training course on running ads or a marketing specialist who simply does this? You could argue that they still need to run Google Ads or Amazon Ads, but just wait for two separate announcements from both companies, which we cover below. Now, Zuckerberg was connecting two ideas regarding how hugely important WhatsApp will become in the future, even though it makes little money today. The first one is that people are not going to be interacting online, in public, as he has for so long expected us all to do on Facebook, right? With everything in the open. Instead, it is already happening that people see something on TikTok, but not everyone wants to go viral or comment there for everyone to see. Instead, they bring that which they see to messaging, to group chat. So that's already happening. The second one is that WhatsApp has already become a customer service tool for many small businesses across Asia. And this will soon be the case everywhere. So thanks to these AI tools that Meta is releasing and that make faster progress because Llama is in theory open or somewhat open, then all of these stores or small service providers will be able to automate many of the B2C interactions that now happen. And at that point, Meta can start bringing them entirely new customers through WhatsApp ads. And those can simply be priced in terms of conversion value with no additional effort required. So if you think the DMA and other tools will be enough to make Europe less dependent on Meta, you probably have to reassess that, as the entire society now runs on WhatsApp in Europe, much more than in the US, of course. And this will now become the arteries and veins of local economies. Anyway, let's move on.
On May 6th, Google released AI Max for search, automatically adjusting text and creatives in any Google Ads campaign to match the query or declared intent of the audience.
Yes, advertisers always had the chance to provide multiple alternatives for Google to iterate and test what worked best, or the ability to match different titles and descriptions with different keyword groups. But that extra work, whether done by agencies or more diligent bidders, will not be rewarded anymore, as anyone can pretend to be as extremely relevant as possible. And then auction dynamics and conversion signals will ensure that people do get adequate ads. So again, less work for agencies, less work for the marketing professional that did something pretty basic. Now, on the Amazon front.
On May 12th, Amazon introduced AI-powered contextual ads in Prime Video. These new ads are dynamically generated by AI to match the content that viewers are watching at the exact moment that they pause a movie. These ads are also computing existing audience signals, like browsing behavior and purchase history, to make them even more engaging.
I am assuming that people will have previously accepted the Prime Video terms and privacy notice, explaining how their Amazon purchase history will feed into the system, whether they are aware of it or not. Then on May 21st, Google expanded ads within AI overviews, for now available on desktop in the US, and started testing ads on its full AI mode, which was recently launched, easing concerns that AI searches would do away with the cash cow that search has always been, right? So easing shareholder concerns, I should say, and directly confronting the challenges presented by Perplexity and others. Then on June 4th,
HubSpot released a native connector with OpenAI's Deep Research, which allows marketers to analyze CRM data through natural language, democratizing advanced analytics functions that have never been widely available.
This could be a really big deal in the MarTech space, disrupting both the data analytics and CRM spaces. Now, I'm going to move on to the next section, AI, competition, and digital markets. We had mentioned the fine that the European Commission had imposed on Meta under the DMA, the Digital Markets Act, on April 22nd. Well, Apple received a much larger one of 500 million euros for failing to relax its tight control of the iOS app developer ecosystem through abusive App Store rules and fees. The Commission had been sharing very specific requests in this regard for many months now with Apple. And Apple is facing similar claims in the US at the hands of the Department of Justice, together with 19 states. To make things even harder, the judge in its lawsuit against Epic Games ruled in April that Apple should not collect fees on purchases made on external websites outside of iOS apps, and a higher court confirmed such ruling on June 4th. Then, moving on May 13th, OpenAI was at the center of a fight between copyright and privacy.
As part of the lawsuit filed by the New York Times against the company for copyright infringement, a judge ordered OpenAI to preserve and segregate all output log data from end-user interactions, effectively overriding its previous privacy settings. ChatGPT Enterprise, ChatGPT Edu, and API customers with a zero data retention ZDR agreement are exempt from this order.
Yes, then there was the Google machine gun of announcements at its yearly I/O event, Google I/O event on May 20th.
Google announced an AI mode, a new deep think model called Gemini 2.5 Pro, a new text-to-image model called Imagen 4, an impressive video generation model called Veo 3, and more features for its agentic AI browser, Project Mariner.
Then the following day, in line with OpenAI's tradition to cast a shadow over Google's yearly accomplishments at their I/O event,
Sam Altman announced the $6.4 billion purchase of a company with the exact same name, I/O, which had been founded by the legendary Apple designer Johnny Ive. It is speculated that the company is building an AI-first device which could eventually displace the mobile phone.
Then on May 22nd, Anthropic released Claude 4. And its Claude Opus model is able to work on a single task for up to 7 hours, while Claude Sonnet is building on what I thought was an important breakthrough, which was this idea of the hybrid reasoning model, making it even more efficient. And this hybrid model, again, this was announced last year, can dynamically switch between quick, near instant responses and more thorough step-by-step reasoning. But you do not need to go through this binary choice of, do I go with deep thinking, deep reasoning, or do I go with the regular model? Instead, it will just pick a model on the fly based on the task, which I believe it is something that we're seeing now on Perplexity as well. For its part, OpenAI released GPT 4.1 with some improvements of its own, and had also released new reasoning models in April, including O4 Mini, which allows for faster, more cost-effective reasoning.
On May 29th, Perplexity launched Perplexity Labs. This paid feature allows users to create complete projects like reports, spreadsheets, dashboards, and simple web apps with a single prompt. It uses AI to research, analyze data, write and run code, and assemble everything into polished outputs.
Yes, and a few days later, Manus AI, the Chinese agentic AI platform, released Manus Slides to generate slide decks in seconds. But since we already had tools like Gamma.app to do just that, I wonder where the agentic breakthrough lies here. Then on June 2nd, Google launched AI Edge Gallery, allowing users to execute AI models entirely on their devices for image analysis, coding assistance, or text generation, while keeping all data processing local. A promise that has always been there, right? The tools are available as an Android app and will soon be available on iOS as well. With this, let's move on to pets and zero-party data. And here I will only mention a couple of things. First, the European Law Institute, which is based in Vienna, has released its guiding principles and model rules on digital assistance for consumer contracts. We'll add the link to the episode's blog post. And this makes for an interesting read if you have been following the discussion about laws applicable to transactional agents or digital assistants for consumer contracts. Over in the US, Diana Stern and Daza Greenwood have been writing about this as well, but I'm planning to cover that in detail after the summer. And secondly, on May 19th, Arvi Guha, who's the creator of RSS, which powers, for example, this podcast feed, and schema.org, he announced the launch of NLWeb, standing for Natural Language Web, from his new position at Microsoft. This allows a website publisher to enable a conversational experience of its content. More importantly, every NLWeb instance is also a Model Context Protocol server, MCP, which will sound familiar if you have been following the agentic AI space. And this will allow websites to make their content discoverable and accessible to agents and other participants in the MCP ecosystem. Now, moving on to Future of Media. In fact, I will not be adding anything new to this section this time around, as we're quite tired of discussing consent or pay models, the impact of a potential Google breakup on media publishers, and the very slow pace of change at most quality publishers. That said, subscriptions and donations seem to be working well for some key outlets like the FT or The Guardian, which is always great news. With this, I thank you for your time, and this is it for our Spring Newsroom.